In the United States of America, there are plenty of prisons that have become historic landmarks, like Alcatraz or Sing Sing. But when it comes to places that are the scariest looking but aren't necessarily famous yet, one place stands above all others. Hi everyone, I'm your host, and this is most likely the scariest prison in America. So if you think you could handle being locked up in this place, then make sure to let me know in the comments below. Also, make sure to smash that subscribe button, because here we explore the dark side of the US, so you don't have to. But now, let's begin. This isn't an abandoned insane asylum, nor is it a haunted house. It's a prison. This is the Eastern State Penitentiary, which is located in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. You might be wondering, why is this place so creepy? And to understand that, we have to go back in time a bit. Originally, this prison was built in 1829, and at its core, they wanted to use this prison to experiment with rehabilitation through isolation. Basically, this prison was designed for solitary confinement. Now, while today we look back at this idea and see how horrible it truly is, at the time, they really thought this was a good idea. They also thought it would cut down on violence and corruption among prisoners. As John Horman wrote in his book, The Pennsylvania Prison System, a few years after the prison opened, by separating the prisoners from one another and from all other human influences, it was hoped that they would be brought face to face with themselves, and thus led to a better understanding of their own faults and a reformation of their own conduct. That, however, never really happened. Now, before we continue, we have to talk about the architecture of this prison. Eastern State Penitentiary was one of the first big projects for an architect named John Haviland, who later went on to design many more prisons. Because this prison focused on solitary confinement, the cells were much larger than what you would find in other prisons. Each prisoner was given a cell that measured around 7 feet by 18 feet, and they had 2 windows. Now, you might ask, why did they have 2 windows? Well, they had 2 windows because the second window was actually fake. See, this fake window was used to bring light into the cell, but it couldn't be opened. The only way a guard could get light into the cell was by using a metal shutter on the actual window. If they wanted to do anything else, like let in fresh air, they would open up a hatch in the ceiling, which would let in both light and fresh air. These cells also came equipped with a bed, desk, and chair. But what they didn't come equipped with was a toilet. Prisoners would have to use a bucket that would then be taken out by a guard once it was full. Yeah, no thanks. Because each cell was so large, they were also equipped with dumbbells so the prisoners could lift weights and stay strong. In fact, one prisoner ended up becoming pretty buff, especially compared to the guards. A man named Wilson, who had been sentenced for burglary, became such a weightlifting legend inside the prison that after he got out, he went on to become a strong man in circuses and fairs. So you might be thinking, if these cells were so large, and they had all these luxuries like desks and chairs, then it couldn't have been that bad. However, it was very bad, and there were multiple issues with this prison almost immediately after it opened. For example, it was obvious that having a fake window across from the real window made it seem like the cell was twice as small as it actually was. Prisoners would literally bang against the fake window in frustration. Also, guards would often cover the real window with the metal shutter, just to make the cell darker and more miserable. One former prisoner described it as, "The walls seemed to close in on me, and the iron bars looked like the sills of my coffin." At the Tionaji, they found that having the prisoners by themselves drove them insane. Prisoners would talk to themselves, walk around their cells in circles, and scream at the guards. Then there was the issue of the roof. Originally, the roof was supposed to be soundproof, so that inmates couldn't hear each other. But, as we know, sound travels. So when it rained, the water would drip onto the inmates' cell floors, and it sounded exactly like someone tapping the metal shutter on the window. Finally, there were many instances where prisoners either tried to or successfully took their own lives. For example, in 1854, an inmate named John Robinson stabbed his cellmate in the heart and then killed himself soon after. After this, they had to remove one of the cells from each tier to make room for a new office. This also helped alleviate some of the sounds traveling between the cells. Despite all of this, for quite some time, the prison was still seen as very progressive. Other prisons began copying Eastern State Penitentiary, such as the Ohio State Penitentiary and the Michigan State Prison at Jackson. However, Eventually, people realized that solitary confinement wasn't working, and instead of rehabilitating the prisoners, it was making them violent and insane. So, Eastern State Penitentiary stopped using solitary confinement in 1913 and instead adopted the more traditional method of grouping prisoners together. But sadly, this wouldn't be the end of Eastern State Penitentiary's problems. From 1913 to 1951, the prison operated with little to no funding. Cells were left in disrepair, plumbing burst, pipes froze, and even elevators broke down. By the early 1950s, the prison was crumbling, and it was clear something needed to be done. Then in 1952, the prison was finally shut down. The next year, demolition was set to begin. However, after part of the prison was demolished, people began to protest. They wanted to save the prison. Since the prison was now empty, people saw an opportunity to use the building for other things. One of the earliest uses of the prison was as a storage facility for the American Red Cross. Then in 1968, they tried using the prison as a juvenile detention center, but that failed. Then in the 1970s, they tried turning it into a parking garage. Yeah, you heard that right. A parking garage. They wanted to turn a historic prison that housed some of the most dangerous men in America into a parking garage. Thankfully, this idea was scrapped. Then, in 1994, the city of Philadelphia decided to open the prison up to the public as a tourist attraction. Over 1 million visitors have since come to Eastern State Penitentiary to learn about its history or simply to take a tour of the prison. In fact, the prison is so scary looking that it has been used as a filming location for multiple movies and TV shows. You may have seen scenes from the movie The Sixth Sense filmed there, or maybe you've seen it used in the TV show The Flash. Eastern State Penitentiary is arguably one of the scariest buildings in America. And considering its history, it's not hard to see why. Now, I want to know, would you ever visit this prison? And if you were locked up there, how long do you think you could last before you broke down? Let me know in the comments below. Also, don't forget to subscribe so you can join us next time when we explore another scary place. But for now, thanks for watching.